For you people getting this on your wonderful local cable station, we're taping these 1 hour at a time. And we understand some of you are only getting the second half hour. For those of you thusly, what is happening the first half is generally taken up by the reading of a group of papers known as Kyroots. Parables, stories, aphorisms, maxims, adages, epithets, fables, tales, hypotheses, prostheses, no, postulation, something or other. At any rate, they're read. And as they're read here, on a screen over here, right off camera, is flashed the page number as they're being read. And the people here, if they find any interest, they write down the particular number. And then they selected me, I come up, and then Kyroot is over here, and if I look at the number, they're written down to the page number, and I see if there's something that might be said with his kind permission. That's the way it goes. Are you ready? Some of them, as you're about to see, I will go ahead and read, but some of them, Kyroot either does not want me to say anything or all kinds of possibilities. Either I look at it and decide there's nothing to be said, or you fill in your own version. I look at it and Kyroots said, this one guy would get wound up. When he'd get wound up, would get really wound up. You got it? And Kyroots said, once this one guy'd get wound up, he'd get really wound up. He did, in fact, so good that they started letting him wind other people up. When I first looked at this one, I wasn't going to say anything, but if anybody wants a hint, consider all of the world's best known, revered institutions. Enough said? Sure, it's good that institutions can't watch the show and write me dirty letters. Just their agents, and I know enough, having gone to the Superman School of Night Law School, I know enough not to take an agent's threats too seriously. All right, and Kyroots said, there was a speaker in the park and he proclaimed, quote, the mind is drawn to the past like a ship to the ocean floor. And I noticed when that was read, this got quite a response. So I guess we're going to stop there, except the damn thing goes on another half page. And a man in the audience responded, kind of pleading. He said, but I find that metaphor highly disturbing. And the speaker said, well, two things. First is, it's simply not a metaphor, and secondly, tough shit. And a man writes the advice doctor on top of all of this and says, dear doctor, since the indications, I assume he means of what's been going on here, since the indications seem to be that a man's routine mind is not very original or creative, is that why there seems to be so few artists who are also intellectuals? This thing is so multiply pregnant that I don't know where to start. So I won't. Aren't you people glad getting the 30 minutes? Did I explain this so it makes a lot more sense now? And Kyroots said, in the midst of one reality a man thought, how are we to ascend, conquer, a mountain that has our fingerprints all over it? There's more. I wish I hadn't even seen the bottom or heard it. But think about that which you're going to conquer, if you're going to look at it, again, assuming this is, since the word like is not in there, I guess we can assume it's a metaphor instead of a simile. We could say, if we're going to say a mountain is like, what? A mountain is like a man's ignorance. A mountain here is like all that the human intellect hungers for, etc. But it says, how are we, the guy thought, how are we to ascend a mountain that has our fingerprints all over it? It would seem to me, Kyroot's not objecting, it would seem to me that saying how are we to ascend a mountain that has our fingerprints all over it is somewhat of a more up-to-date or a expansive version of people believing the only thing we have to fear is us ourselves. The only thing we have to overcome is ourselves. That's pretty old, folks. Pretty hell. It's real old. I know I've played around with Adam and Eve before, but surely one of the first 2 or 3 things, since I've already sworn that I knew the first 1 or 2, but surely the first half dozen things, one of them was Adam and Eve looked at themselves, looked around what was going on, because it was only, you remember, a few minutes after, or at least a few sentences after they were in paradise and everything was just going swimmingly well, and then it's, like the apples hit the fan. I mean, that was God's mad at them. There's only 2 people in the world. Well, 3 if you count God. And what happened? There's 3 people, and those 2, within minutes, managed to piss off the other 3rd person, which as it turned out, wasn't just your routine other person. It would seem like they would have done better off to make one another mad. But no, they made him mad, and so there it was. It was just bad news immediately. And so I was going to say, surely one of the first half dozen things is they looked at each other, and then themselves, because then they turned philosophical. As history says, everyone does in times of great stress, turmoil. And so they looked at themselves and thought, well, who do we have to blame for this fine mess? I mean, since Stan Laurel's not here. And they thought, ourselves. Who got us into this pickle? And they thought, ourselves. It's real old. And I would suggest to you that it was not just to overcome that, but I would suggest that this is a wider retelling of the reality behind that. That this man is wondering, how can we ascend a mountain that has our fingerprints all over it? Which you've got to consider, if they're picking out a new area, which if we're going to talk about ascending a mountain, you've got to assume from the grammar of the sentence that they have never ascended it before. They wouldn't be talking about it, or he wouldn't be talking about it. And so they're going to a place they have never been. And the guy, metaphorically, I assume, looks upon something to ascend, in this case a mountain. He's never been there, but he looks and he says, how are we to ascend a mountain that has our fingerprints already all over it? Addendum. Such quandaries, such questions propel secondary machinery and finance such expeditions abroad. What drives men? What drives the human intellect to keep wanting to ascend some mysterious mountain? You don't mean that the question itself enters into this. No, I didn't mean to say that. I was looking between these pages and my lips just said I was just trying to kill time. Like some people will go, I didn't mean to say that. It was just my lips did it. So I don't know what it means either. Okay, and Kyroots said, in the city, the theme for this year's Old Soreheads Annual Ball was, and this is the theme, I'm quoting, must the impotent dream of lust, must the hungry lick the mud from the library's feet again. And once more, there was a certain lad and his dad who played this little game. The father says, the fun of being ill is to get well again. And the boy replies, yeah, but what's the fun of being ill? And then Kyroots says, no, I do not have it backwards. See, this little piece means that if it was backwards, I'm trying to insinuate that somebody might go, well, that almost makes sense. Now, if it was, what's the fun in being ill? What if the game went that way? And the other guy says, well, to get over it. And I guess in some circles, that could pass for perhaps a kind of low-octane insight, some sort of metaphysical allegory. And may I suggest, knowing this lad and his dad, and knowing Kyroot, that it was not done just for the sake of taking something that could have been and twisting it around. What if the kind of process, the kind of sequence that you would normally think if you tried to think of this, that the game went, one guy says, what's the fun in being ill? And another guy says, to get well. Because you can do a lot with that. Not only do a lot with that, you can detail one of the paramount hobbies in all of secondary life. What is the fun of getting ill? Not dying, but just getting ill. To get well. What's the fun of having a hangover? To swear you'll never do it again, and just finally make it to Sunday afternoon, and 200 aspirin finally work. That's the fun, in part. But what if you put it the other way? The father says, the fun of being ill is to get well again. And the kid says, what's the fun of being ill? See, sometimes repetition does have an effect. And Kyroots offered a second verse to a ditty from last time, because the ditty last time didn't seem to hit many people, and no one requested it, so I didn't get to do it. Everyone knows what a lip sync act is, don't you? In showbiz, 30 years ago, it was called a pantomime act. It's where you play a record. Most of you people would know it from American Bandstand or even the music videos, but it's people playing the record, their tape, their music, and lip syncing it. And last time a guy made some mention in a Kyroots about what a lip sync was and what normally passes for intelligence. Based upon the reaction last time, I assume is why Kyroots says, why Kyroots offers a second verse to the ditty from last time. : A man who studies the ideas of others at the expense of his own creativity does not have a CD collection, but rather he's got a lip sync act living at home with him. I don't know why I'm pointing at home with him. Non-musical corollary. Some who just can't bear it decide to teach others about it. Let's see. Would anyone care for me to refer back to number 4, where we started, page 4? There was this one guy who'd get wound up, and he'd get really wound up, and he did so good, in fact, that they started letting him wind other people up. Now may I read the non-musical corollary one more time to this one? Some who just can't bear it decide to teach others about it. Well, I know this is off the subject, and I shouldn't be offering my personal opinions, but it is that kind of clear-headed thinking that at least gives me some concern about those out in life who will just badmouth and degrade religious, humane, compassionate, charitable people that are just simply trying to help their fellow man. And Kyroots said, as long as the mind can dream of tomorrow, there is a tomorrow. And Kyroots offered an alternative version. As long as the ordinary mind dreams of tomorrow, tomorrow will be ordinary. And Kyroots turned and asked a few, which one do you like best? Would you like to run back over to second? And Kyroots said, as long as the mind can dream of tomorrow, there is a tomorrow. Would you like a... That's not much more than 10 words. One of those short, pithy, all-encompassing descriptions of what man's secondary world is. As long as the mind can dream of tomorrow, there is a tomorrow. That's got nothing to do with death, you remember. That's like the one last time of Kyroots. That it's only those acceptant of death who die. But you got to be intellectually viable. You have got to have your mental machine engine operating. You have got to have a secondary world extant in you for death to be something to accept or not. That is, to think about it. Because you're going to die, if we're going to call it that. You're going to lay down, get real warm, rot, stink, and that's it. And not get back up in anyone's lifetime that knows you. You will not stir again. Unless they mix you up with some hash browns or something. But do you see any connection? That in other words, you cannot accept death. You cannot entertain death. You can't be frightened of death. You can't do anything regarding death other than die. But you can't do anything about death unless you can think about it. And so now Kyroots has this: as long as the mind can dream of tomorrow, there is a tomorrow. You don't see any connection? If you're ordinary and did see any connection, you could say, yeah, this one's not bad. But that other one sucks. Well, everything that sucks, alternatively, exhales. So, and then Kyroots offered an alternative version. As long as the ordinary mind dreams of tomorrow, tomorrow will be ordinary. So may I suggest you got it this way. And everything having to do with the secondary world, having nothing to do with optimism, pessimism, religion, being enthusiastic, being otherwise, that you've got this. You're going to die, plus it's going to be tomorrow as long as you can think about it. That the secondary world thrives. Oh, let's be specific. Lives. Forget thrives. Lives on the dreams of tomorrow. Without dreams of tomorrow, there is no tomorrow. Without what just ordinary people call the dreams of tomorrow. Not just the mind being drawn to the past like ships to the ocean floor. Everybody likes that. Not just that, but you've got a similar situation to the future. That men must dream of tomorrow or there would be no secondary tomorrow. Looked at in a crude way, it's not just some metaphysical flim-flam that I made up, or that he made up. It's, like the old thing, not making any judgment as to your hobbies in ordinary life, but why would a man get up at all and go out and run the secondary race unless there were dreams involved? Because you do not have to go up, put on a suit, get a good haircut, and go out and do the specific things that people do in civilized life nowadays just to feed yourself, just to stay alive, just to be able to afford a large cardboard box in which you could live within a temperate time longitude. And so to get out and to play the secondary game, you have got to be driven by dreams without any sort of judgmental connotation to it. It doesn't mean you're crazy. But if all you were doing was trying to stay alive, you would not be an active, useful participant in the secondary world. And even life knows that. Those who will not get out and play the game, life treats more or less like something that was thrown out the window. You end up in jail, you end up in a home, you end up living in the gutter. It's just the way life is. That if you are not playing the secondary game, you're of no particular consequence to life. So you must be driven, in a sense, by dreams, or there is no tomorrow. That is the secondary world. But then Kyroots gave the alternate version. As long as the ordinary mind dreams of tomorrow, tomorrow will be ordinary. Which, if you followed into that, is, I don't know. It's almost like Kyroots was serving dessert, and you got through the whipped cream, and you found a pickle relish. I can't tell whether he disapproved of that. I was just trying to get out of it. And Kyroots said, over near a crosswalk, a man with a box of onions told a traffic cop, city poets bemoan the downfall of woman on the primary steps in the primary world because they envy what they perceive to be her continued capacity to do so. I was hoping nobody would ask for this one, because when I heard it, I heard what it was, and I didn't want to get into it. But being the honest sort that I am, it was right here. They asked for, I got the wrong page. I don't have to do that one. A man said, city poets bemoan the downfall of a woman at the primary level because they envy what they perceive to be her continued capacity to do so. There is a addendum to this. Maybe if I read the addendum slow enough, I won't have to go back and fool with the body of it. God, can I drag out 20 sentences for 9 minutes? 20 words? All right. The bottom part to this. A question and answer game is played between two solar systems. The question from the first one is, who do the civilized have to be jealous of? And the other one answered, you mean besides everybody? All right. But may I say, without any doubt, knowing Kyroots as I do, this is certainly of no consequence at the kind of primary level. But literature, religious literature even, is replete, which according to some sources here is paucity turned inside out. That even religious literature, metaphysical literature, is replete with these metaphysical poets. I was thinking about life, how quick it had to develop, you remember, a sense of humor. As soon as the age, when it looked up, and Jesus, holy, just the dark ages, and then the You know, the Renaissance had started and just got going good, and life looked around, and there was the, capital A, the age of metaphysical poetry. I mean, life had at least here in this Western world, what? You know, good 3,000 or 4,000 literate years to develop a sense of humor. But suddenly there it was like, well, I didn't know it came this fast. Like, you know, it's April the 14th, and you think, well, I hadn't done my taxes. But how you knew better? But at any rate, metaphysical poetry and so on has been, in case you never noticed, which you're going to have to assume already if you were literate at all, even before you stumbled into this, that even the people, I don't mean that these kind of poets understood what they were doing, but something was driving the hormones. Something was driving the hormones that drive the secondary, literate, intellectual world of man to such a way that men have been thousands of years bemoaning, whining about women having, when it comes down to it, having no morals. That women are susceptible to sin. And of course, even if these poets are kind of uptight and don't say it, they're referring to sexual. That's why Kyroots put the primary steps. And it's like, of course, the obvious being, like, men never have fooled around. But it's, you know, women don't write some kind of metaphysical poetry about, don't try to make me think of somebody and quote them. Because, well, if I could, then you and I both would think, what in the hell is he doing knowing any metaphysical poetry by heart anyway? So if I could think of it, I don't believe I'll admit it. But at any rate, there is no accounts of women bemoaning in some poetic way, the sexual, you know, infidelities, the capriciousness of man's lust. Now, women bitch about it, but hell, they'll throw something at a man, or, you know, leave him, or, you know, call an attorney. But they don't write poetry. So what I am trying to get you to consider is that men have written about this for eons, whatever the hell eons are. But you must assume, you've got to know, that the poet certainly had no idea what they were talking about, but that something was driving it other than that. And I guess if you question them, that's why they call them metaphysical poets, I guess, to be honest. I guess if you did grab one of them and say, is all you're doing is bitching about that women won't be faithful? And let's assume it was some metaphysical poet. I don't want to name one, because again, if I could name one, then you'd say, what the hell are you doing knowing what? So anyway, I'm not going to name one specifically, but if you grab one and ask him that, we'll assume he'd go, well, certainly I meant more than that. Have you never heard of a metaphor? And so you'd have to think, oh boy, boy, do I look dumb. So consider what was driving, metaphorically, men to bemoan, which men are the same thing. There's nothing going on of any great consequence, but men bemoan it and spend good paper, ink, to, I'll go back and quote, city poets bemoan the downfall of women on the primary steps. And then Kyroots answers it, if you were listening, because they envy what they perceive to be her continued capacity to do so. If you followed in that, then you could say, well, that's not true, because a man can be unfaithful. True, but not in the same way a woman. Not the way he looks at it. That's why to man it seems to take on some spiritual, allegorical significance. And whatever connection this has, if any, was the addendum again. These two solar systems play in this question and answer game. And the first one says, who do the civilized have to be more jealous of? Have to be jealous of? And no one says, you mean besides everybody? So I thought if I spent enough time on the body of the Kyroots, then the addendum would just fall right into place. And Kyroots said, this is the kind I always take as a challenge. I always figure we've got somebody walked in off the street and they heard one of these and thought, well, I'll show them. And they didn't have any interest in this. They just asked for it. Just some smart ass. And Kyroots said, whenever he'd get in a jam, this one guy would claim to be a truncated woodpecker for the simple reason that he had no idea what truncated meant. At the beginning of our taping, if anyone hasn't looked lately, I assume it's still in there, it says, just because something makes you laugh is no proof it's a joke. Truncated woodpecker, I guess. That's the kind of thing that in some circles just say truncated woodpecker and somebody'd laugh. And you don't even know why. Just truncated woodpecker. But my God, Kyroots not even a metaphysical poet. Did he waste one good piece of paper, I mean nice paper, just for some kind of joke? I suggest nay. Think about when a man would get in a jam, and forget some primary jam. Well, we're not interested in that. You shoot your way out of that, you knife somebody. We're talking about a jam, an intellectual, a humane, a secondary jam. That is being caught with your intellectual pants down. Being embarrassed in an intellectual fashion. So this one guy, when he'd get caught. Now see, some people, if they'd get caught in a jam, what would they do? They'd holler, "No, I'm Catholic." Not to pick on Catholics, you know. But people would have something to call themselves. They could say, "Well, yes, I slipped. I'm only human." I guess that'd be the easiest one. There is an explanation. The secondary world, since it is invented anew every day by humanity and by you individual, if you're functioning intellectually, then if you get caught and you don't have anything immediately to come up, this guy, I'm assuming that Kyroot means it again metaphorically, since it doesn't say like, we don't have to fool around with the possibility it's a damn simile. Instead of him trying to figure out something like, yes, I'm a sinner, yes, I'm weak, or, well, I'm a recovering alcoholic, well, I was a battered child. This guy just says, hey, he gets caught in a jam right quick. He claims to be a truncated woodpecker for the simple reason because he's getting close to the truth. Because he doesn't know what truncated means. Would anybody else do that? A man says, well, yes, I did that, and I see that some of you people are surprised. Yeah, well, wait a minute. But I know here I stand in the middle of Tel Aviv, and I know I am a Muslim. But this guy gets to the truth. Instead of that, he says, he gives his excuse for being in a jam, but his excuse is that the excuse he gave, he got no idea what it meant. That, may I suggest, with one good finger, is a real excuse. We're talking about a man's excuse. We're not talking about some sissy excuse. We're talking about a man's excuse. Good night.